Larry, some of you like Larry, I've known for 50 some years, although we haven't seen each other in about that long, but it's nice to see you again. And Anne, who was a volunteer at Montgomery Hospice when I was there. By way of introduction, I served our Reconstructionist sister congregation, Oseh Shalom and Laurel, as its first full-time rabbi for over 25 years, retiring from the pulpit to go into a second career of pastoral care. And for the last 18 or so years, I've served at Montgomery Hospice as the Senior Vice President of Counseling, leading about a dozen chaplains, including a couple rabbis, overseeing the bereavement counseling staff and the social work staff, among other things. So it's a pleasure to be here at our sister congregation and working with Martha, whose expertise will guide us over these next few minutes. Martha, shall I go over very briefly some of the takeaways and objectives
What
that
do
we're
we
looking
have
for?
people? Oh, yeah, do the
Or should
takeaways,
we,
then
or should we introduce?
Okay, let's go around the screen first.
Sounds good.
We're trying to, this is a righteous experiment. We want to make a hybrid as inclusive as possible. So Lynn, since you were the first people to hop online, why don't you just very briefly repeat your name, because we can't really see it from here. And just one very short phrase about why you're here, just like
About what?
one short phrase about what you're coming to this meeting.
About why I'm interested, why I want to be here.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Lynn Tagg. I've been a member, oh my gosh, for about 33 years, even though many of you don't know me. But I was very active years ago. And one of the things, this is going to be a few more moments, because I think it's important, is I was on a committee, just a few of us, that interviewed everybody who resigned from Adat Shalom. And what I found was that a number of people would say that people weren't caring for them, that they didn't get a feeling of if there was something going on in their life that people knew. If they had personal friends at the synagogue, they knew, but nobody else. And they said and I said, well, did you tell people? Would people know? And they said, well, no, but they should have known. So I gave that back to the clergy, that there was a strong feeling that I don't know how you're going to say you should have known, except to say people should tell about, that someone's struggling, or that did you know that somebody, whatever. I had very serious heart surgery. My friends knew, but the clergy, I don't know if they knew or no. I didn't deal with that. So that's the only comment. I think this is a really needed thing.
Thank you. Susan.
Good morning. Susan Goldberg here. I can't remember how long I've been a member, but my experience differs from what Lynn is describing. My brother became very ill, hospitalized, and when I contacted the clergy, before I could walk from one room to another, the phone was ringing and it was Rabbi Fred. And after my brother passed, the congregation sent me a jar of honey on Rosh Hashanah with a card that said, we hope next year will be sweeter. And I could give you more examples, but I always found the congregation to be very responsive.
But you started it. You said something. These few people didn't say anything. They just wanted the clergy to know, even though they didn't tell them.
I see. Well,
so someone else has to tell them.
We're going to have lots of time for conversation later. Right now, we're going to just go around and do introductions. Okay, so thank you for that comment, but we'll just, so Susan, did you want to say more on that?
I just want to say I'm here because over the years I've become less and less able to get out and volunteer for the things I'd like to, but I do want to volunteer, and this seemed like a good way to be involved.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Orit?
Hi, good morning. Boker Tov, everyone. I'm Orit Yanko Golan, and thank you for offering this Zoom opportunity. So first, I'm here because it's another opportunity for me to learn from Rabbi Fink, who was one of my teachers at Milton many, many years ago, and with fond memories. And also, I'm here because I found myself in the last several years just showing up to Shivas on Zoom or in person, or first in person and then on Zoom, not really knowing necessarily the person or the persons or the families, but I felt drawn to being present and being a listener and a witness. And so I've been interested. I've made some soups already for the,
Oh,
I don't know if they've been used, but it's just felt like an important place for me to be and to help as much as I can. Many of you know I haven't been here in Maryland a lot these last 3 years, but if I can pick up the phone and call, as I did early on with COVID, and do the little that I can do or the lot. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Neshama?
Hi, I'm Neshama Solomon. Some people may still know me as Nancy. Neshama is my Hebrew name, which I started to use in the fall. I have been a member of Adat Shalom since 2000, and I'm here because as much as I feel like this is really important work, I often feel really awkward and not know what to say to people when they are in pain. And so I just felt like I wanted to hear suggestions on how to approach people, you know, in the best, most appropriate way. So that is what brings me here. I do just want to mention I have to leave at 11:30 from another commitment. So just let you know that I have to turn off at that time.
Okay,
Thank you.
so much. So these little people around the room, we will now talk. And I'm gonna ask Cheryl to speak last. And I'll cede you my time so that you can just say a couple of sentences about the Hesed team, the outreach team within Hesed overall.
Okay.
Okay? So, you wanna start with Yuji then?
Hi, good morning. I'm Judy. I'm also known as Susanna. So some of us have multiple names, but we don't fit into one name. And I'm here because this is what I do and this is who I am.
Thank you. Great example of being short and sweet.
Hi, I'm Larry Goldsmith. Dean and I have been members since 96. So I'm here basically in the last several years, I've become more sensitized to the suffering that some people experience. And I felt a need, and some of my friends have encouraged me to actually show up when people are suffering and experiencing pain, and that I might be able to do that, but I'm not sure, but I'm here to sort of get on the road.
I'm Dina Goldsmith, but that's my Hebrew name. My birth name is Diane, so there are, more than one name as well, but I prefer Dina. I had a long career as a psychotherapist, so it was in that very defined, structured role where people seek out help. The rules of the game were very clear about helping. But when you're not in that structured role of clergy too, it becomes more ambiguous. And like Nisham said, I can feel awkward or shy in those situations. So I'm here to learn, but also Cheryl contacted me a while ago, since I bake challah, to have a small number of people, or maybe not so small number of people, bake challah and store some in the freezer. It could be for Shiva minions, it could also be for a birth of a baby. I'm wondering if the Hesed committee is not just for losses and suffering, but also for all kinds of life cycle events. So that's something I'm looking forward to getting into. I just wanted to wait till this meeting occurred before I learned that.
Hi, I'm Jeff Rubin. I've been a member here really since the beginning. Professionally, I have an MD PhD who did a residency in internal medicine and then worked for 28 years at the National Cancer Institute. When I retired, I thought that exploring work in the pastoral area would be a good option for me, and I trained for 2 years with Jim Michaels at the Hebrew Home. Ultimately, my passions shifted a little more to social justice, but I have always felt that there was a need for more pastoral care at a Dutch Loan, and see this as an opportunity to be more fully involved in that. As it happens, I have a medical condition that puts me on the other side to some extent of this kind of dynamic, and so I feel like to some extent I have a good bit of insight as well as being a family caregiver over the years. So I'm here to learn more and take part.
Okay, Bob Lubrin, otherwise known as Robert Lubrin.
What do you prefer?
I prefer in this environment, Bob.
Okay, Bob.
Okay, professionally it's Robert. I'm not here as a professional. I come here because of my work with the Inclusion Advisory Committee, which I sort of retired this year after 5 or 6 years with that. And I, during that period, I came across a number of people who had needs that were not being met through whatever, through the synagogue, let's say. They were people that were home alone, didn't get out of the house, had issues that weren't being addressed by life cycle because they were still alive. And so I saw a need that needed to be filled, and that's why I'm here.
Thank you.
Estelle. My name is Estelle Quain. I have a middle name, but I don't use it. And I'm here because in 20 and 21, I had surgeries which required a longer recuperation. And just through a friend at Adat Shalom who established a helping hands, we received dinners a few times a week. And that felt so good that I wanted to be able to give back in a similar way. And also as Nashoma said, also, I think I could be more comfortable around people who are in difficult and suffering periods. So that's why I'm here.
I'm Ann Raymond, and I'm a retired social worker. And as Dina and Bob said, I noticed when Bob, my husband, and I joined Adat Shalom in 2016, that Adat Shalom was doing a very nice, really good job. The life cycle people did a great job about bereavement, with notifying people about shivas and all that. But the rest of life cycle was sort of didn't seem to be addressed. And so I started at that point. I offered, and it was accepted, for me to be acknowledge births in our community. And so I was delivering baby baskets anytime there was a birth of a child, of a member, not grandparents, but to the parents. And I feel like that's my focus, because full disclosure, my daughter and son-in-law are members here with 2 little kids who are in Limud. And I'm concerned about us being more welcoming and inclusive of the younger people. Looking around here, our age group is well represented, but if we wanted Adat Shalom to be here in 20 years and 30 years, we need to be welcoming and be more welcoming. And part of that is addressing life cycle events and reaching out to people from when they're born through any kinds of difficulties they have before death, as well as bereavement. So I also served on the Pastoral Care Committee, and we got a lot of the input that Lynn was talking about, reading about how people felt that they weren't often acknowledged when they were going through a hard time. And we were reading these comments and saying, wow, that Shalom needs to be doing a better job. So I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. So Cheryl, will you also address, just where this is within this outreach team is within the overall?
Yes, first, I'm so glad all of you came today. This is a really important session, and I'm grateful to Rabbi Pink for coming, and for Martha for pushing to organize it, make sure it happened. So my role right now on the board is I'm vice president for programming, and that there's a lot of there, but we don't have a Hesed committee. And so I put some effort into this year with Rena, with Shauna, with some of you at this table, into kind of really rethinking, expanding, and implementing better practices to make us a more caring community. And you're right, top to bottom. So I'm hoping this is the start, but really, ideally, at Shalom, everybody will be in the Hesed committee, because we're all going to be on the receiving end at some point, and we should also be on the giving end. So Martha, I'll make this succinct. We're thinking of it right now in sort of three kind of bins, that will all be under Hesed. This one, which we're calling right now the outreach team, that'll open to a better name. And it's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. There are just lots of people, and I'm like, wow, I haven't seen X for a long time, but do I just pick up the phone and call? Yeah, ideally, yes. So maybe we can talk about that kind of thing, Rabbi. The Shivas, in some ways our Shiva deal is pretty great, but there are lots of places it could be improved. It could certainly be more systematic, and we're trying to ramp up the various cadres of volunteers that are needed. Like last night, I was trying to find people for 3 Zoom Shivas this week, and the list of Zoom Gabayim is way out of date. So anyhow, that's like a little thing. If that were established, it would be easy to fulfill some of these needs. And then the last one, as Ovid and Ann and Dina mentioned, it has to do with things as simple as food, making sure that a meal is provided, or a lift to the doctor occasionally, or a visit when somebody is recovering from a hip replacement, just to break isolation and just be there. So we're going to be figuring out in the next few months how to create cohorts where the members, this work speaks to them specifically. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got a lot we want to do today. We want to do a couple of exercises related to the idea of breaking through the awkwardness, but that happens. We have towards the back materials for your use if and when you do make calls or visits. I'm in the process of working with the office to develop some lists of who could be contacted. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. I'm just giving you like the view of the next 65, 70 minutes or so. Before we jump in, Rabbi Gary, you want to just say a few words about the overall objectives?
Yes, sure. I'm going to stand up, which I normally wouldn't do in this kind of setting, but because I'm so far from the Zoom folks, it'll bring me a little bit closer to all of you, and so pardon me for standing in this kind of setting. Martha has outlined some objectives that I'm going to summarize in a couple minutes. She's outlined 2 takeaways. One takeaway among the most important is that this committee, this group, this outreach group here, is here not to fix, but to accompany. We're all here and we do what we do, all of us, because we want to fix, we want to help. That's who we are, right? It's our nature. At the same time, we have to realize what our limits are. And in this particular case, it's no small thing to accompany and to be present, which is the second takeaway. The first takeaway is not ours to fix, it's to accompany. The second takeaway is that our role is to provide what is often referred to as ministry of presence. Ministry not in the Christian term, but the small m. We minister to folks with our presence, to be present. And that is a powerful response to someone's pain. If we're not in a position to, or it's not ours to try to fix, many situations are not fixable, we can accompany, and that can be a great, great comfort. And then we're going to touch on, and this I hope will be the first of a number of sessions of how-tos, and we're going to ask those of you, all of you who have experience in life or professional, to assist us with these how-tos, how to communicate, how to respond to someone who does not particularly wish to speak with us, which is actually okay. How to respond with someone who practices TMI, giving what feels like too much information, how to handle that. Some communication strategies. Among the other how-tos are respecting the confidentiality, the sacred confidentiality of the people with whom we speak. And then to have some sense of what kinds of issues, what kinds of things might we sense where a referral to a clergy or a professional or an outside research is most important. All of you in the outreach group can be the eyes and ears of the community to note needs that people have and perhaps provide some resources. So we can be media or mediums to direct someone or bring someone together with a more professional resource. All of this work, this outreach work, is, I'd like to suggest, and I think all of you are aware, very sacred work. And so it's appropriate that we begin with a bracha. But what kind of bracha would be appropriate for a committee like this? Well, you probably, I'm sure you know the bracha that ends with the words La'asok b'divrei Torah. We give thanks for occupying ourselves with words of Torah. Well, there's another bracha which is more contemporary that ends La'asok b'divrei Kihila. We give thanks for the responsibility of occupying ourselves with the needs of the community. So we'll recite the bracha. The first part of the formula is the same. The last words, La'asok b'divrei Kihila, to occupy ourselves with the needs of community. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei kihila.
Amen. Amen.
And with that, Martha, the floor is
Okay,
yours.
well, thank you. So now we've heard from Rabbi Gary. The next two paragraphs are from Rabbi Fred, who is away right now. I think quickly we can go through this. Maybe one person, oh, I'll take care of that. How about one person can read from, it's okay, Gary, I have my PowerPoint and you go ahead and read before holding.
Okay, and we'll go around. Before holding, visiting.
It's okay, Gary.
We're reading before holding on the first page. Not all of what we will be doing is calling or visiting the sick, but we do know that being isolated increases risk of illness. So when speaking with someone who is recovering from an illness or injury, is socially isolated, or a person we simply haven't seen or heard from in a long time, who we suspect could be one of these categories, the interaction may have a healing component. This is in line with a long tradition in Judaism whereby visiting the sick is considered to be walking in God's ways.
Confidentiality. As a member of the Hesed committee, confidentiality is important. This includes issues that may be shared in this training. When we unpack what has happened in Chavruta, do not share anything your partner said. Please share your own insights, And once we're actually speaking to or seeing members as part of the committee, it is vital that you do not share any personal information with other members of the congregation. Later, we will go over a form for documenting outreach and situations that may need to involve others.
Can I make a suggestion that we consider the confidentiality as a anti-Trump principle? You follow me?
No.
We don't talk about things that are confidential outside.
Right.
I mean, we don't talk about it when we're playing golf.
Yeah,
Documents. Like
or when we're in
national
dialogue.
security.
Okay.
All right, but really anywhere, what happens here stays here. Yeah, so let's spend a few minutes on discussion before we get into some breakout rooms or role play. So Susan.
I would like to know what Havruta is, please.
Oh, it's well, it comes from the word for friend, but it's we're gonna break into dyads in a little while.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So, but this is great because we have to. We need to. What we're doing here is as Robert, aka Bob, pointed out, is related to inclusivity. So when we use words from Hebrew, when we use words from our professions, we're all older, white, and I assume mainly Ashkenazi Jews here. So we just need to have our filters open that while we're trying our best to be inclusive, that sometimes we're just not gonna cut it, and it's great if somebody just asks a question and says, what do you mean by, or offers a friendly amendment. All right.
I can send this out on email too. I think this came up in another brainstorming meeting. Is this committee or outreach team, the final name of it is called Hesed Outreach Team, or is that name still in process? I'll just say, because it's a Hebrew word that's spelled differently in English, depending on who's writing it. It's a hard word for many people who don't speak Hebrew to start off and say it correctly, which is Hesed. I love that word. I'm wondering if we can, if the name is still in process, if we can add another word in English so that people also know right away, and there's no assumption that people should know the word or could know the word or know how to pronounce it. So that's just a question and a few comments.
It's still being debated, and I took note from our last meeting when you said use the H, but even on this document, it's, you know, it's both ways with the CH and the H, because she said it's kind of like cheddar. So that was enough to make me think, okay, let's just use the H. But if anybody has a suggestion for it, I'd rather not always have to have a parentheses. Sure.
One idea is just call it the caring committee or the caring outreach committee. You know, because it's caring about people in our community from birth through death, no matter what they're dealing with. I like the word outreach though in there. So.
I like that.
Okay.
Compassionate outreach.
Yeah, I think, you know, for these kind of comments, it'd be great if you could drop it in the chat and maybe even email me and my Adat Shalom email account. So Judy.
I wanted to say something about the confidentiality term because I think it's part of the foundation of what this work is about. And the term has become very charged with today's political climate. And to me, confidentiality means, is it my story to share with other people? Or do I have to ask permission from the person whose story this is? And that's all. And so not to go across boundaries of things that don't belong to me without asking permission from the other person.
Thank you. Great. So, whether we're Hesed or caring outreach, one of the first things when we make a phone call, one of the first things when we greet anybody is we say, "How are you? How are you, Bob? How's it
Fine.
going?" Yeah,
Fine. Thanks for asking.
yeah. And it becomes a kind of a throwaway. And as Rabbi Gary pointed out, we are concerned here with being really present. So on page 2 of the handout, could Nashama, did you get the handout? I emailed them to you.
Oh, I did not get, I don't have it. Let me take a look at the email, but I don't have it now. So you might
Okay.
ask somebody
Yeah.
else.
Okay, so Susan, would you just read the first line under the citation for where this came from?
A sincere "how are you" can become a true gesture of being present for someone.
Thank you. So in a moment, we will break into dyads and people in the room can find a nice cozy spot. And I've got breakout rooms set up for people online. Did we? No, we didn't lose somebody. It just shifted. But let's see, do we have time to read? Let's just read number 1. Would somebody either here or in the room or on screen like to read number 1?
I can do it, Martha. I found it.
Okay, great.
Ida has severe arthritic pain. It's time to consult her physician because the old prescriptions and the usual home remedies have not given any relief. Moving with difficulty, she enters her doctor's office using 2 canes. She grimaces as she lowers herself to the chair in the examination room and props her canes up beside her. Her doctor comes into the room. They have great affection for each other. These bad bouts have been frequent. He nods hello to her as he enters the room, turns his back and washes his hands. His muffled voice, coming from somewhere out of the back of his head, asks, "Well, Ida, how are you today?" Ida replies, "Fine, thank you, and how are you?"
Thank you. Anyone want to read about Elaine?
Elaine, recovering from a bout of pneumonia, responds to her hairdressers, "How are you?" with "not too fantastic." Her hairdresser, without listening or thinking, replies,
No.
"That's good," and starts to wash Elaine's hair. In a twinkling, she realizes what has happened and says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were saying not too bad." And she continues to wash Elaine's hair.
I'm sure we've all done this. I'm sure we've all been on the receiving end of this, but anybody want to say what they think, what they think happened here?
Mark, I can. So, yeah, it's obvious that the person wasn't really a presence or a listening presence for sure. Certainly not a healing presence. But I just want to share quickly is I've had a few medical issues of late, and there's some people who come up to me at ONEG with this "how are you" thing, but it's not just saying "how are you," it's the body language. And their body language to me was utterly palpable. And it's something that I just carry with me. So anyway, it's very powerful when, and there's no, I don't know what the magic formula is to actually be present. But they were that for me, and it meant a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I say, something?
Yeah, Ben.
I find that oftentimes the correct response is to find ways of repeating something that the person said. So it really acknowledges that you heard them. And if they want to say more, they're encouraged to.
Great, thank you. One comment I had is sometimes saying, how are you is so general, we don't think. So if you say, how are you today, or how are you doing today, it focuses it in, it makes it more manageable, and that extra word, I think, suggests you're more able to listen. Yeah. Or you're interested.
Yeah, I've taken to saying to a friend who I know is quite ill, saying, how are you feeling?
Mm-hmm.
That to me feels a little more, it's the how are you is like big, but how you're feeling seems to me a little more specific and like I'm aware that something's happening with them.
I would say, what you may have been reacting to in terms of body language is part of that manifestation of presence, that people are communicating that. There were two examples here. The doctor's back was turned, the hairdresser was preparing to wash the hair, really wasn't paying attention. So if someone is trying to engage with another person, you need to show it. That's part of being present, and whether it's making eye contact if you're in person-to-person setting, or the tone of your voice, that it's not the how are you. You can tell the difference between how are you and how are you. I mean, it sounds different, and I think it will elicit a different response.
Yeah.
The wording that you made, I agree, there are different ways. If you emphasize feeling, or you say how are things, that you kind of read sort of an open opportunity. It's not the performative sense of you're there, I'm going to say something.
Yeah. So, I thought what we would do is we'll spend maybe 10 minutes altogether, because the Zoom gives you about a minute to come back, in dyads. And we will practice active listening, but it will be a little more involved than some active listening exercises we've done in the community in the past, where you just sit and, person number one speaks, you sit there, and then person number two speaks, and person number one nods appropriately. You can think of ways to elicit, and I offered some prompts, but it sounds like you all have ideas of what prompts are appropriate. And then maybe if you could go 3 minutes each, 6, we'll do an 8-minute exercise. Then you can spend about 2 minutes unpacking it, but there's no need to strictly time it. I'm suggesting that person number one spend 3 minutes, and person number two offer some prompts to elicit more, and then you switch at the 3-minute mark, and you'll be at 6 minutes, and then you can spend about another minute or so just unpacking how it went. Just one other thing is that I love what you said about body language. Most of what we'll be doing will happen over the phone, at least the first contact. We can talk about Zoom as an appropriate way to reach people. And a lot actually will start with an email or even a text, like what's a good time, or I called, I got your voicemail, I'm from a Dr. Shalom, I'd really like to, follow up with a phone call. So we have to figure out ways of offering presence kind of under less than ideal circumstances. So without further ado, do the people in the room, if you break out and go places, do you have ways to time yourselves, like 3 and 3, and then 8?
Why don't I just
Yeah.
announce when 3 minutes are up and 6
Okay.
minutes are up, just to give
Okay,
you a sense of
and I'm
time.
gonna send
Ready to go.
people off into cyberspace.
And what are we talking about, Martha?
It's on page 2.
Oh.
Any other
Yes, each
questions?
other
Any
got
questions from the Zoom room?
So one person is going to ask the other person about how they are doing, how are you in any way that feels comfortable, and then hear the response and elicit further conversation if it feels right and however it feels right. And then we'll talk a bit about
3 minutes for that.
3 minutes for the first person,
Switch roles.
and then you switch, and the person who was saying how they're doing, ask the other person how they're doing.
Martha, is there anything we should do being in the Zoom sphere? Or you're gonna do it and I'll just be,
You into Zoom rooms, but I actually do want to say a couple more things. One is that it's your choice if you want to say what's really going on in your life. So again, the confidentiality extends to the breakout session. The other thing is that please, avoid giving advice. We just want to practice listening. It's not, just keep on eliciting more and more of the how are you, and see if you can go a little more deeply into it. If you don't need the whole 3 minutes per person, you can we're not being overly prescriptive here, but we just want to elicit that how are you from the superficial fine to, something a little more real, which may or not, it might be all good stuff, and that's fine too.
Can I just say that, like, if I was told by the office or you or somebody, Martha, like X could really use a call, and I don't really know X, and I arranged this call, and then I think it would be so awkward to have somebody I didn't know, like, just kind of pulling information from me. So that, I don't know. It's fine. I mean, I know everybody at this table. It's going to be different.
Yeah, we'll be talking about disclosure and how, and that's one of the debriefing aspects after this exercise, to be sensitive to how it feels to be put on the spot. Sometimes when someone asks us even a simple question, how are you? Some of us tend to feel, gosh, I need to say something, and it can feel awkward. It may not feel comfortable. So we'll be discussing that, how to make that first call, how to introduce, in order to get into, in order to communicate, I care about you, and I'd like simply to be present without pushing too much or making you uncomfortable. So it's a good point that is important for us to discuss.
Yeah.
We will.
Yeah, if the respondent actually wants to play the part of somebody who, you might just say, oh, I'm well, and then you can talk about, yeah, I saw this beautiful ballet the other day, and then Bob would maybe ask more questions about the ballet, and then circle back to, I called because we haven't seen you in a long time. I just really want to know how things were going. So again, we're not necessarily trying to elicit, the big stuff. Ari.
Cheryl, thanks for asking that. Actually, I remember at the very beginning of COVID when you were looking for people to call just to check in with, I think, individuals who we knew were on their own, isolated and on their own. I think what helped our conversations, for me at least, was telling them who I am and why I'm calling. And a little bit, I got your name, I'm just checking in, I'm just saying this is what helped. And most people were so grateful just for that call and that connection. And I do need to talk to you, or read, or I don't need to talk to you, or can you get this from the office, or can you help me with? So I shared about me first, who I am, why I'm calling, and if they knew me or not. That really helped make the bridge. But maybe Rabbi Fink will talk more later.
That's a great start to that conversation, which is important for us to have, and we will. But if we'd like to get to the exercise to stimulate even more conversation, let's do that briefly, and then we'll be able to talk more.
Do you want to pair us up or?
So if you wouldn't mind just pairing up yourselves,
Well, not the two of you.
right. Yeah.
So, I'll come
Yeah,
in.
great.
Great, okay, here's an extra
Okay,
chair
thank
here,
you.
or this chair there.
Let's go.
Terrific.
I can use my
I'm
chair.
following you.
Okay.
Take our phone to time it.
I have my watch.
Yeah, and I've.
I don't mind if you want to start getting that.
Okay.
I didn't bring my phone.
I'd say, to me, it's just being real for where we are. I mean, it's easier for me than trying to imagine something.
Are we muted now? Can you mute us? Thank you.
Very good.
Yeah.
So now we can start.
Very good.
And there's a Jewish community.
Yeah.
All righty.
It's on that same, the synagogue, my sister
And then the person said, no, we're fine, thanks very much.
on
And I
that,
thought, okay, well,
and the Jewish
here's my
community.
name and everything.
And the Jewish community center,
And some people would want to.
which they've actually opened up one unit in Ten. So the Jewish community is small, but I'm, Jewish Historical Society.
I'm like a true board member. Welcome back, everyone.
When on that.
All right, this is what my husband does when he's calling everybody back.
Older.
High five!
Yeah, Rose College. I went on the same.
Okay. Okay.
This is
Welcome-
yours,
welcome
Gary,
back.
No, that's fine. Got a couple of good, thanks.
So, in yoga teacher training school, they taught us to always have more for every lesson plan than we can possibly do.
Every teacher.
So, so we want to spend some time processing this exercise, not to put each group on the spot, but more like popcorn sharing, anybody who wants to share something. We're gonna skip exercise 2. We think that the level of sophistication in this group, the issues in exercise 2 are pretty obvious. And we're gonna go over the issues anyhow that they elicit when I'm gonna hand pretty much the rest of the session over to Rabbi Gary, who will go into when something is real, how to discern if something might actually be a pastoral issue or something that should come to the attention of staff, and how to, just discern. Did a great job as a friendly voice. So without further ado,
We want to
let's do
We
the,
want to debrief what
Yeah.
you're calling popcorn sharing.
Yeah.
So we want to talk about the experience we just had, not necessarily the content, but about the process of what we just did and about the conversation.
Yeah. Lynn,
Lynn,
you're still on mute.
oh, unmute, please.
I think
Yeah.
everybody
I
automatically.
got it. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think the Zoom afforded me and Natasha an advantage that we could see each other so easily. That's all we could see. I could just see her face. And so I could see how responsive she was. She told me I was very responsive too. But when you're just looking at someone's face, their eyes talk to you. Their face talks to you. And so I truly felt that she was with me. And that was a very nice feeling because I was talking about real things that have happened in the last few months to me. And even though she didn't say so much, it was really clear that she understood. Then we went the other way. She was telling me more. Yeah, I was telling more of a depressing story. She was telling me more of an uplifting story, but that was so nice to hear it and to look into her eyes as she's telling me. And again, in this first question and answer, once or twice I said something, oh, that's wonderful, that must have been difficult. But most of the time I just was present, as you say. That's all.
Great, thank you.
Yes, it's true that a phone call is so different than face-to-face because there are so many fewer cues. It can be exhausting, though, because the energy of the caller needs to be attuned so much more even because we're attuned to voice cues only, and it's not as reliable also being able to see the visual cues. And so it's important to be aware, but also I think not to jump to too many conclusions. I, for example, am a lifelong stutterer, and the affectations of my voice largely come from my stuttering issues, so that sometimes someone will interpret something that I say in a different way because of the affect of my voice that has nothing to do with how I'm feeling, but with that particular issue. So we have to be careful not to overjudge, but still to be sensitive and thoughtful to listen to all of those cues.
I really like the way Cheryl started us by bringing up something that happened many months ago and tying it to the present. And it was very light, it was just a couple of sentences, but it was enough to tie an unfinished conversation from several months ago and bring it to the present.
When she was asking about you,
Right.
she referred to previous conversations.
Right.
How wonderful. Oh, she remembered
Right.
that I said this. Isn't that wonderful?
Right.
That's so affirming.
Very affirming and it was a wonderful way to knock on a door that I didn't even know was there.
Yeah, so if someone mentions the name, or if you have the name of their family members, and you mention the name of a family member in a subsequent conversation, that too is very fair. Oh, she remembers that my grown son is David, who lives in Florida. Other thoughts?
No, I was just gonna say with my memory that it's rough, but that's.
So in a much, much shorter time frame of minutes rather than months, when I came in this morning, I said to Jeff before we got started, how are you? Because I know something about Jeff that really made me want to ask that question. So we did the exercise kind of in advance before even looking at the sheet. So that made the way we interacted once we were Hevruta, we could do the debriefing kind of, and then kind of shift it around. So sometimes these things happen organically.
It's really a kind of a lovely gift to be able to sit just with one other person and really try to listen. I mean, I haven't really talked to Bob one-on-one in a really long time, and it's in a way it's very grounding because you've turned off a lot of the noise that goes on all the time.
I was going to add the same thing, and because we typically are here on Shabbat, that's when most people get together. You don't have time, quiet time, to actually have a conversation with somebody. So I felt that the few minutes we had together, which might have been in a social, you go out to dinner, so on, but to talk to somebody for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, is really golden time because you're quiet, you're focused, and I think that's one of the advantages of what we are proposing to do, which is to have that conversation with somebody who you may or may not know, but in a short, brief period of time, in order to get in a quiet mode and get some good interaction.
Question,
Jeff.
if Bob set me up for this unknowingly.
I know.
The exercise we just had was reciprocal, intentionally. For the calling that we're gonna be doing, it's not, my understanding is it's not like intended to be structured in quite that way. I know from the training that I had in pastoral care, when we're want to get into active listening mode, we want to stay in active listening mode and not have it flip and distract the party we're engaging with to focus on ourselves. We don't want to end up in that place. So I'm wondering, in terms of preparing us for doing the outreach work, I'd be interested in guidance you could offer in that respect.
Let's discuss that
Later.
that point. No, let's do that now. It's on the agenda, so it's an important question. How much do we disclose as callers? Of course, therapists and rabbis and others know that we always try and focus on the client, and we're very wary about self-disclosing because we want all of the attention to be on that caller, but that is an unequal relationship, and we want this relationship to be more equal. So certainly there aren't nearly the same, we shouldn't be so careful about not disclosing about ourselves. At the same time, the dangers of talking too much about ourselves is that we take away the focus of the person that we're calling. So what thoughts do you have about that balance between sharing about ourselves but not dominating and leaving space for the other person?
Yeah, I think one thing we have to just acknowledge, part of this, is that probably 99% of our contacts are going to be by phone, not in person. When we're calling in this
Right.
role, we're going to be reaching out to people. And most of us at this point don't even answer the phone if we don't recognize the number it's coming from. Things have really changed. So we find that to be intrusive or annoying at best. We will be leaving a phone message. So I think right up front, we will need to introduce ourselves, and you're probably going to get into
That's exactly what is next on the agenda,
okay.
how to make that
Do you want me to
first
hold-
call.
Yeah, that's basically saying when you call, hi, this is, and you say your name, this is Ann Raymond. I'm calling on behalf of the Adat Shalom Hesed community. We're reaching, and then you say why you're calling right up front. Whether you're doing that in an email, a message, or phone message, but I'll let you take it. But
Yeah,
I
great.
think that's important. But in answer to the question of how much do we share, I think that it's very, very possible to be empathetic without getting into your own stuff. So if basically when Larry was sharing some things with me about what he was going through, I could say something like, wow, it sounds like that must be really hard, or I can understand, that makes sense, or that, you give affirmative responses, so the person knows you're really listening, that you're taking them seriously, you're being respectful of where they're coming from without them telling your own story.
Right.
So there are ways of doing that.
Right. Someone says, I'm dealing with a broken hip. We don't want to say, oh, my mother-in-law broke her hip, and let me tell, oh my goodness.
You say, I'm so sorry, that must be really difficult.
Good.
And then you let them
Right.
keep talking.
And Bob.
Okay, a brief comment. 90% of the calls might be by phone, but that's just the initial phone call. And you might end up with an ongoing conversation. You might end up in person. You might end up somebody says they need a drive to the doctor's office. So it may be initially a phone call, but it may lead to actually something in
Oh,
person.
of course.
Sure.
The other thing that kind of came up with our conversation was that I know that there's a spouse involved. And I wanted to just ask, how is your spouse doing? At the same time, I wanted to find out how my client is doing, because oftentimes people would say to me, oh, I understand your wife has some issues, but how are you doing? And I found that to be very powerful and very supportive.
What are the questions we can ask? How is your spouse doing? How is your spouse handling this? It sounds difficult.
Yeah.
How is your spouse handling this? Dina, please.
So at some point during the pandemic, I volunteered, maybe some others, to call people who are above a certain age in the pandemic. Maybe this was in 2020.
You didn't call me.
I'm sorry, but.
Oh, I'm beyond that age.
Okay. So anyway, some of those people figured out that they were being called because they were old. Okay, and I think some of the people were okay with that, and some of the people felt insulted by that. So in a situation like that, I think if I would have known to disclose something without a lot of detail or time about myself, a general statement, yeah, a lot of us are feeling isolated. This is a way for the community to connect with one another. So it wasn't just because, are you old, you need help with something. It would have been better. So sometimes limited self-disclosure creates comfort and is an invitation for the person to open up even more.
And it also makes the relationship more equal.
Exactly.
It's not,
Exactly.
you're the victim and I'm going to help you.
Exactly.
It's, I want to check in on you as a
Because those
friend.
people may not have had any problems at all, or maybe they did, but the only qualification was they were above a certain age.
Susan.
Yes.
Susan,
Yeah.
unmute yourself,
Yeah.
Susan.
Susan, you are muted. There you go.
Okay.
Okay.
I find that one of the most useless questions in the world is, what do you need? How can I help? So if we're going to be leaving voicemails, I suggest, call us back if you need anything. I suggest not to say that, but to offer specifics. Do you need food? Do you need a ride? Do you need soup? Do you need to talk to someone? Please let us know, and offer things that you're able to provide.
That's a great point. We want to offer what we can without over-promising.
Right.
We don't want to say, what do you need? I need a ride to the doctor, but if we can't come through and provide that ride to the doctor, we have failed. So, yeah.
And saying, leaving a voicemail if somebody doesn't recognize you on caller ID, and saying, please call me back if you need anything.
Yes, sure.
I don't want to bother them.
Okay.
But they may just want someone to talk to. So offering specifics is more useful, in my opinion.
Okay. Lynn?
I've had a quandary at times when, either doing this professionally or personally, is that sometimes I've said, yeah, I had the same thing. And the person, their face looked very pleased that they weren't the only one that was suffering. I've had 2 heart surgeries. And so I've said, I had the same thing. And it is very painful. And they looked very pleased. So I'm wondering what people think about that approach.
Well, would it be even more helpful to say, I've had a similar experience, rather than the same thing, but every situation is different, and I'd like to hear more about how it is for you. So we identify, it's not, I know how you feel, it's the same, but I've had a similar kind of situation, but I'm really interested to hear how it is for you,
Yeah.
because I know it's always different for each person. And
Like that.
reflects back.
Yeah.
Good,
I was
yes.
just thinking, in response to what Susan said, I agree that in the first, if we're leaving a phone message, you could say, your name is, and I'm calling on behalf of this committee, I'm calling to check in. Oh, can you, I was wondering if you could let me know when would be a good time for us to be
Yes.
in contact? And that's what you're leaving in that
Right.
first phone call, is the chance. And then in the follow-up, I know that, since I served on a bereavement committee at another synagogue before joining here, I provided the committee here with a list of those specifics, so it's not a general thing. It's saying, we are able to offer help with a shiva. Do you need books? Do you want to be contacted by the clergy? Would you like a Shabbat dinner this week? And then those are the specifics, but we don't do that in the phone message. That's just the list is too big. So, but that initial phone, I don't want to.
No, that brings us into the conversation of how to make that first call, and that's a very good point. Bob?
That suggests that it would be advisable, I think, to have a script
Yes.
for us to be consistent, uniform,
Yes.
and to pretty much agree upon how are we going to introduce ourselves?
Right,
What is
good.
the message?
That's a good
And
idea.
so on. So I think
Excellent
putting
thought.
together a quick little script would be a good step.
Mhm.
Agree?
Yeah.
Yes, very good,
Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
except for the, I gotta say that in a lot of this political stuff where you contact people and you're given a script, that just really turns me off. I mean, for me personally, you have to make it, you've gotta be authentic and
Yeah,
whatever.
take it conversational.
So what we would say is
Yeah.
that whatever script we have are going to be guidelines,
Right.
suggestions. We may even
Yeah.
develop a couple of different phrases
Scenarios,
that we
yeah.
can use. And it's also difficult and challenging, but important to be aware of our voice when we're entering that conversation. In hospice work, we are particularly sensitive to that. There are some who have what I call the happy hospice voice. And you come into a hospital room or someone's bedroom and you, hi, how are you doing? Because you want to cheer them up. And that sometimes doesn't meet where they are. At the same time, we don't want to come in like the funeral director. How are you doing? I understand that things are rough, and I'd love to hear how things are. We don't want to do that. And so we each have to be comfortable with our own voice, but try at least to find that middle ground to be conversational, natural, and not overdo either side. Also, sometimes it can be best to talk in ways that you all are. I'd love to hear how you're doing, calling to check in. Love to chat with you about how things are, that sort of thing, so we can leave it open and relatively light and let the other person fill it in. Gigi?
I wanted to, this just came into my head, that there is an assumption in my head that before I make a phone call like this, that I have done my homework in as much as possible, knowing who the person is, what their situation is, and why I am in this place, so that it's not a cold phone call as in a political thing, but it's stepping into as much as I can know about what I'm going to encounter.
Good, and that would lead to explaining in that first initial call why I'm calling. I understand that you've had some experience with illness, and I wanted to check in as a member of the community to see how you're doing.
Or not even to disclose what it is that I know, but for me to have some kind of information,
To at least know.
to at least know as much as I can.
Yeah, and I know I think Rabbi
So-
Fran's brief, he suggests that some calls may be made to people that we haven't seen in a while, that have been coming to services but aren't anymore, and I notice that you're not around. I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing, and say hello.
So what I wanted to pick
Dina.
out about your voice is that it wasn't the happy but it wasn't the somber. It was a warm, kind voice that was in a middle range. There was a matter of fact quality to it, but it was kind. And I just think that that is the good range to aim for when we're making these calls, particularly with someone we don't know or we don't know much about. So I just wanted to read, because that
Thank you, Dina.
conveys a lot over the phone.
Bob? Lynn?
I don't know if you've covered this, but how do we get the names? Do people say they welcome a call? Or are you just picking names from the Adoption Shalom membership? That's the question.
Speak to that, or Martha?
Okay, so, and Shirley, you can, right now, we are going through some lists of people, it's both and. So it's people who we know are experiencing some kind of issue. If it's a major issue, it would come to clergy first and then to me. If it's, but if it's we know that so-and-so has been home for a while and could use a call, so that would come to the committee. It could also be people who are above a certain age and live alone, or not above a certain age and live alone. And that's why, and we're working on these lists right now. I got a list and it was I did a very blunt screening of it, and now Rena's looking through it, and Rabbi Fred's looked through it. I think right now, it is important for us to have some kind of very brief introductory script, which I'll be happy to work on with input from a couple of other people. And then I want to talk a little bit more before we move into these resource lists and complex situations about how to pick up cues from a phone call. But I find that in this role, that it's easier to pick up cues of how to navigate the self-revelation, spending time in general chat versus kind of getting to the point of a more pastoral kind of call when I'm in the person's environment, because I can see them face to face, I can see what's in the room. On a phone call, it can be a little more difficult to pick up those cues. So I went into another thing. Do you have anything else to say about who we're going to be contacting?
No, not really. I would just say that it's a really good question, Ari, but the process just isn't solidified yet. So I'm not sure how we'll reach out to you, everybody, on this call, to let you know.
Right.
So, look,
Right.
that's,
It may take a couple more,
Yeah.
more months to finalize this. Yeah.
this is all a work in progress, and I just want to encourage you to all send your ideas and suggestions to me and Martha, or even just Martha. And one question, Rabbi, before we go, is there a part of this about reporting back?
Yes, that's on the
Exactly
last
what's
page.
next.
Yeah, and I have a question, just, we seem to be assuming that the initial call will be by phone.
Yes,
Wondering, like email, because for me, writing is so much better than talking, that's just the way I am. And I can really get things down on a written page, so to speak. So I don't know, is email or text messages, is that something that's even considered for this initial outreach thing?
or the video, when you're talking, this is great to be able to really see the person, which it could be on, what is it, that you do on your phone very quickly, or the Zoom.
FaceTime.
FaceTime, that's it, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, for an initial contact, of course, we wouldn't do the FaceTime or the Zoom, because we would need to set that up.
Right.
Right,
That's possible, but for follow-up calls, that's certainly something that you all could arrange. Or if someone is comfortable emailing, that's a fine question too.
yeah,
Do you have a preference for phone calls? Would you rather us email? You can certainly do that. It's my sense, although I'm not sure, that most people prefer to communicate by voice, but there may be some who would prefer email. So there's no reason why one couldn't bring that up.
And it's just the initial outreach,
Yeah.
that's what I'm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly, well, yeah, we can
Actually,
talk about that in
yeah.
committee.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
is.
But that's
something-
That's a
not
thought.
for today, not for today, or that is for today?
Well, I think that when I work out a little script, I'm gonna have an email component, because I often do that, because people don't pick up their phones.
Right,
They don't
right.
Yeah.
recognize
Yeah.
it.
I don't.
Yeah,
Are we still
Would it-
aiming to conclude by 12:50?
Yes, we are, so.
Yes. Um, yeah.
Yeah, but I think we're doing great.
I think you're doing terrifically.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
think we're moving right along.
Mhm,
This is
Yeah.
very good.
Uh,
And thank you for being here.
My
There's
pleasure.
so much experience and perspective in this group. It's-
Exactly.
I think we're very fortunate.
Exactly. What do we want to try to discern, to assess, say, in a phone call, in an initial call? Simply, if there are any concerns that someone has. What are the concerns? How comfortable someone is disclosing about themselves. We might sense that someone they're not interested in talking about serious stuff at this time, and that's important to respect. We don't want to press. So what concerns, what kinds of disclosure. It is also sometimes helpful to discern, to assess what kind of support someone may or may not have from family members, from friends. Are they isolated by themselves, or do they have lots of support? And we're just part of a large team. And those are basic questions. Concerns, support, how comfortable they are disclosing, to get us started in meeting where a particular person is. All of you will be encountering many different kinds of situations, and part of this agenda today is to talk about the complex situations that raise serious concern with us. If someone needs services, they need transportation, they need food. If someone seems spiritually lost, and very quickly I'll give you my definition of what is spiritual and spiritual distress. Spirituality, I would suggest, has to do with anything that gives us a sense of meaning and connection. So it can be religious, but it can also be non-religious. It can be more spiritual. And oftentimes someone feels lost and alone and unconnected. That's a spiritual or existential problem. They may not be in physical pain. There may be no physical problem, but if someone feels isolated and alone, that is truly existential or spiritual suffering. And our presence addresses that to some degree, and we want to make a note that they feel isolated or alone. Someone also, we might hear or sense or think that someone is in an abusive or dangerous situation. Someone may say, I have no reason to live any longer. If there's a sense that someone is, we can do a whole session on this, but if we sense that there is some existential danger, abuse, something like that, we definitely want to call someone, one of our clergy, Martha, someone that we can relate, this is what I heard and I'm concerned, and just let them know and help them discuss with us what we're hearing and what we are seeing. There are lots of resources, including the suicide prevention hotline, which is 988. And that's always something that we can say. You know, if you're ever feeling that this is the end, you can always call 988, and there are people there who can give you immediate help. That's an important research just to know off the top of our heads and to keep that in mind. I do want to add one other point here about situations that seem and feel serious. It also happens that what feels serious and what is a crisis to us is actually normal for human behavior, particularly say after a loss. Many people do feel lost and they're grieving, and we want to help, we want to fix it. Sometimes it's normal for someone to feel despondent, not clinically depressed, but feeling low and sad. And sometimes the answer is, of course you're sad. That sounds like a very serious loss, just affirming that, yeah, validating that, of course, that sounds really, really difficult, can be a wonderful, wonderful help. If you're worried, though, that someone is in serious trouble, speak to Martha or a clergy. Sometimes what they can do is, after listening to your report, say, oh, that sounds pretty normal to me, but why don't we see if we can follow up a little sooner? And to that end, if you feel that someone has a need and you're able to do so, how to follow up is one of the questions. Is it going to be standard to call once a month, once every 2 weeks, or to decide after every call, or perhaps in consultation with Martha or someone else, how often would be the best time? Certainly, if we feel that someone is in great distress, we can say, would it be okay with you if I called you in a week to check in? Or if I called in a couple weeks to check in? Or is it okay if I call from time to time to check in and see how you're doing? You can say it that way too, and that way set up our follow-ups. If someone says, I don't know, we can always say, would you like me to send you an email to see if you'd like to call, or would you like me to call and just see if you're interested in talking? Letting them know that they shouldn't feel any obligation. And last resort, we can say, that's fine if you'd rather I not call. Please know that I'd love to hear from you anytime. If you'd like to check back in with me, here's my number, or here's the number that you can call. And feel free to call if you ever feel like it. Any thoughts or questions? Gina,
So
please.
I have a legalist question and then something that's less complicated. So when I was a social worker, for homicidal and suicidal ideation or intent in a plan, because there's a spectrum, we didn't get people's permission. We had a duty to protect for both homicidal and suicidal. So we could make a phone call on their behalf without their permission. I doubt we're going to be in that situation, but lay people don't have that same legal requirement in those excuses. That's another question. We don't have that same legal requirement.
I don't believe so.
Right.
Yes,
So
certainly
it's
professionals do.
it's
Yes.
ambiguous
Yes.
what we would do in the situation. I would tend to want to call someone.
Call someone else and say, this is what I'm seeing. Should I be worried? Should we do something?
Right. So in
Yes.
the old days, when there were more landlines, maybe this can be done to cell phones. You could make a phone call to some kind of a hospital or
Yes.
authority, and the person was on the phone, and you were with them, and you could
Right.
explain and talk to the professor, and you could have a three-way conversation. I don't know if you can do that with cell phones.
Yes.
Okay, I just
Yes.
have to, so that's an option. I also had another, but it's not a complicated question, so maybe I should
Please.
wait for Anne.
Well, mine
Yeah,
was
go
just
ahead.
saying about the issue of confidentiality. If we say to a person, when we're introducing ourselves, explaining why we're calling, we want to find out, is there anything that we can supply, that anything you need or that would want us to do for you? But if somewhere in the beginning of the conversation, we say, if usually the confidentiality might come up, that we're not going to be sharing what you share with me today is not going to be shared with other people. But in fact, that's not true. It's the things that the rabbi just mentioned, that we're going to be referring to Martha or referring to the rabbi, then we're not being confidential. So we'll have to figure out, we don't have time today to deal with that.
Yes, yes, everything is confidential. Of course, if someone is in serious danger, we would then
Yeah,
call
so-
There are good
someone.
Samaritan laws, and I.
No, I know, but in terms of the trust of the person you're
Yeah.
talking to,
Right,
I
right.
don't care about the laws right now, I'm
Yeah.
talking about the relationship that you're setting up with the person who you're calling.
Yeah,
And if you're saying, I promise that I will not be sharing this with anyone else, and then in fact you do share it with Martha, then you've broken that confidentiality. So we have to sort of,
Sometimes I'll ask, is it okay if I mention this to?
That's
to-
and if they say no,
Then you
Okay,
don't.
so
Then you don't.
first of all, we felt that we had to put this in here because of the very, very unlikely situation of finding somebody who's either actively suicidal or in a very dangerous situation, and you can't reach anybody in the office or any clergy, and it's very unlikely that you would be out there on your own with this situation. In all my years as a community health nurse, that happened to me once. So the likelihood of it happening among folks here is infinitesimal, but it could happen. As far as confidentiality is concerned, I would do the conversation, and then if somebody mentions something, say, is it okay if I share this with Rabbi Fred, or is it okay if I share this with Martha? If they say no, then you can't. If they say, if you think it's still a good idea, you can encourage them to let you do that, or encourage them to contact on your own.
One of my twins was in 7th grade. We learned that one of her close friends was suicidal and had actually tried to commit suicide. And Annie kept this private because it was a secret. And I remember saying, there are some secrets you can't keep. And if I really thought somebody was in terrible danger, I would need to do something.
I think my question is about not the suicidal abuse. I'm talking about the more normal things. If someone says, I really don't want you to tell Rabbi Fred, I don't like Rabbi Fred, or who knows what they're going to, so then you kind of
Stop.
Right. And some of this is a judgment call.
Right.
My last little question, but it's not about an urgent situation, so I don't want to stop someone from asking an urgent question.
That's okay.
Sometimes some people, we're talking about maybe people might be reluctant to talk and they may not want to talk. There are also those people who really like to talk and they won't stop. They're very needy, they go on and on and on, and you may not have the time or the inclination. So I also think it's good for us to have some skills for a polite way to get off the phone or off a Zoom or in person to excuse yourself, because maybe that person isn't reading social cues either, that it's time to not say so much. You want to be, so I'm just finding that as a.
That's a very important point I have written down in my notes, exit strategy. Because there are some people who are very good at keeping us on the phone. Just when we use our voice to cue that it's time to wrap up, well, it's been nice talking to you. Oh, did I tell you that I have a big problem with such and such? And so, working out ways to end the conversation gracefully is an important skill. We may want to work on that in future meetings, but keeping that in mind, and it's perfectly okay to break in at some point and simply say, I'm really pleased to be speaking with you. Unfortunately, I have to end the conversation. Is there a good time that I can check in with you in another couple of weeks? I'd love to continue the conversation and hear more. And that's one conversational strategy that we can use. And there are, in extreme situations, it's a difficult skill to learn, but sometimes we simply need to, after a number of tries, simply say, I'm so glad that we've been speaking. I'll look forward to speaking to you in a couple weeks. take good care, bye, and then hang up. Say your bye, do everything. in a
I talked
polite
to that
way.
rabbi thinking he just hung up on me like that.
That's the risk. That's the risk that sometimes we have to accept.
Then your
That's
Yelp
right.
review is gonna be terrible.
That's
Oh,
right,
what?
that's right, 1 star.
Speaking of exit strategies,
Yeah.
we have a couple more pages here, but in a way, this is good to have all this feedback because we can do some more work on them and talk about them at another time.
Please
What
do
I
look
was-
over the resource list, that's an important,
Yeah, and I want
page.
to give you my phone number under internal on page 5. Martha here, this is what happens when you do a cut and paste. That's why you have Hesed with an H in some places, CH in some places. My phone is 240-606-6509. And it is true that I don't always pick up if I don't recognize you, so you can text and then say you want to talk.
Martha, can you repeat that? I didn't hear the first 3 numbers, please.
240-606-6509.
Thank you.
And so that the ending isn't abrupt, I would like to say a couple things and then invite people to stay for, if you want to stay till 12:30, you can. If you can't, nobody's going to think you're bad. So I cut you off, Rabbi Fink.
No, that was just the right time to move into our ending. I would just like to end this piece with an important point that our role is to walk with our fellow congregants on their journey, not to take them with us for a ride. We want to be with them and walk with them on their journey. That's the role of the outreach committee.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do we have any contacts at Jessa? We don't have a phone number here, but we should have a phone number. But also if we had a listing of who's responsible for aging in place, who's responsible for mental health, et cetera, rather than calling the main number and get passed around 4 or 5 times. That would be a helpful
Those
resource.
contacts are on the website. But having a contact phone number, I think, is a good idea.
Yeah.
It would probably be a matter of just repeating what's on the website, but, we could make a more, I don't want to do a resource book, but I think adding to the resource sheet so it's a little bit longer and fuller is a good idea. So anything, like what Bob just brought up, you can get that to me.
But I'm looking at the website, it does not have contact
But
names.
there's also the Montgomery County Mental Health Association.
Right.
There are hotlines in Montgomery County. There's something called Evermind in this country. It used to
Not
be-
everybody lives in.
Right, not everybody lives in Montgomery County. So Jessa is not the only option.
Right.
And the 988 number is also for other general issues where we could get county resources, mental health resources. It's not just for suicide prevention. Yeah.
So again, what I want to emphasize is most of these calls are not going to be this level. And it's really about, if anything, I think our overlap will be with membership.
Yeah.
Which is fine. Actually, Vicki Bremen and I had a conversation about that. That's absolutely fine if sometimes we're bleeding into membership. It's just a matter of having this if we need it. We don't want to be giving people advice. We don't want to be telling people they should go see a therapist. Maybe we should have another gathering at the end of the summer And we can talk more about cultural cues. Some people are more emotional. Some people will talk about something that happened to them and get teary. Other people are more stoic. So if you can think of situations that you would like to address in another gathering, maybe when we have the sheets ready for people to call, the game plan ready, please just let me know what those are.
Well, I want to pick up something Gary said and something else said. I was at service this Saturday. I saw a couple I haven't seen in quite a while, older couple, and the word welfare check or well-being popped into my mind. There's situations where somebody that you know, you go to service all the time and you haven't seen Joe or Mary, or Joe and Mary for quite a while. To me, that's an opportunity for a welfare check or wellness check, however you want to call it, just to give a call and say, hey, I haven't seen you for a while in Shoal, everything okay, anything you need? So that's not a situation where you know somebody, and this is somebody I know who has chronic health issues. But I wouldn't call because of the chronic health issues. I'd call, hey, I haven't seen you in a while, everything okay?
More of a check-in.
A check-in.
I'm a check-in
I
with
call it a
you.
welfare check.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, another category.
You mean check, not money check.
Yeah, I don't want to say welfare check.
Welfare check.
Well, I don't think anybody in our community is on welfare, but,
There could be.
oftentimes you hear about police who do a welfare check.
Right.
And sadly, there's some situation where a policeman gets shot because he knocks on a door and they have a shotgun or something. But they're doing a welfare check on an individual that somebody said in the community, we haven't seen.
Very good.
So I think that's.
Yeah.
I was going to say also, we don't really need to reinvent the wheel of things that have been worked, that were successful. We had a life cycle committee here. I noticed that no one from that committee is here today, which is unfortunate. Victor Resmovic, we have Mark Gunther, and Shelley, I think, is on the way out. But anyway, there was, so when I joined this congregation, I shared with them for my bereavement committee some checklists of the things to say to people on the phone. They had those lists. They had the script. I said, here's what you say when you call. I mean, they had it already, but I offered it, and follow-up sheets and all this stuff. So we don't need to invent all of this. It already exists. They have it.
Great.
Or if not, I have it on my computer at home. That I'm happy to share.
But is this group replacing Life Cycle?
Yeah, Life Cycle is no
But
longer
not
listed.
this,
No, it's
not
not.
this particular team.
It's really not. It's not.
Well, they're not listed
They-
anymore on the committees.
Okay, can you
Yes,
go over
well, they've
the
been,
three-part?
they're going to be part of the Hesed committee, and there's a whole focus on Shiva, but the life cycle team they're still very much in existence. We're
But it
going to be
has to change the
expanding it.
name, and now they are the bereavement committee now, then, right? But that's what they are. They are a bereavement committee.
So again, Hesed is going to be in, I think, three parts. This is the outreach team, making calls. What we're calling Life Cycle will be another team, that's my understanding, right? And maybe
I
we
wanna
would
be
call it bereavement team, or we could call it something else, but we are not, our focus is not on Shivas and recent deaths.
Right, so that's bereavement. That's what I'm
That's
saying.
bereavement.
Don't call it a life cycle committee if it's not a life cycle committee. It's not driving me
Can I-
crazy,
can I-
but it's a misnomer, and it's not
Yeah,
right.
could I ask Cheryl, so if someone experiences the death of a family member and the life cycle bereavement Shiva group provides Shiva minions and all that wonderful support, does that group make follow-up calls to check in on those bereaved people the month and 2 months after, or is that this group?
It's very sporadic.
Uh-huh.
And mostly, I think that falls to the clergyman. I think that's sporadic also.
Mhm.
So these are all things that we're trying to make
Yeah.
a little bit more
So
consistent.
what I have been doing in my role is following up with people at their first yard site. I think it might be a good idea for our group to follow up where, again, somebody's had a loss and we don't see them at shul for a while. Maybe we're not seeing them at shul for a while because they're just not that connected. There are a lot of people who do the funeral, sit shiva one day, and then get on with their lives. There are other people who we may not see because they're going through something. So we might just make a friendly check-in call. I think that's something we should talk about. But I just want to make clear that we really aren't focusing on the recent losses. I think you bring up a good point that maybe we should do some follow-up a little farther down the road.
I think we need
We can talk about
clarity.
that.
We need clarity about who's doing what.
Okay.
Right now, I'm getting a very, an answer that's not clarifying it for me personally.
So one thing that's changed, not to go too far down this path, is that for many years, people would call the life cycle committee when they had a loss, but that's really not the ideal now. That's not what's happening, because then you reach Mark Gunther when he's on the highway with his grandchildren, and, you know, they need a connection with the office and the clergy, so that's the first stop.
So what is the life cycle committee
Well, you know,
going to do that we're not doing?
so, and this.
Yeah, it's really, it is a whole
conversation.
other
What's
conversation.
the third part of Hesed?
Could I just one real quick, in terms of follow-up, if we want to make it more systematic, a logical time might be at the end of Shul.
Yes.
It's soon enough where there's still feeling, but there is, it is a milestone.
And Vicky Bremen came to my house when my father died at Shloshim, and I have never been more moved than by that visit. That was extraordinary.
Yeah, so I think that.
So is that, so we're saying that's under this committee, not under the?
No.
life
That
cycle
was
committee?
under, that would be under, well, actually, Life Cycle never did that. They always did immediately after.
Vicky.
Yeah.
So I mean,
That's
I think
why
it
I
should be
said that
done,
would be
and we
clear.
could figure out which group does it, if it could be part of outreach to do it, but
Okay.
it's a decision
Okay.
that has.
We're trying to have it more so that one life cycle committee person is sort of like a bereavement mentor that kind of is with them during that period. But
Yeah.
I hear you, Ann. The reason we're doing all this focus is because there's room for improvement.
All right, so I think we've rolled the ball down,
Yeah. Okay.
and we've done a very good job. Thank you very much for coming. Who invited you?
And thanks again, Martha, for
I've
getting
been
us
working
together.
with Martha along
So
the
what
way.
is the third part?
Okay, so the third leg
So you're not.
is to actually give some
Right,
practical
right,
help.
yes, yeah, right. Martha and.
Right now, I would just be careful of over promising, but we will,
Transitioning.
it sounds to me like we really should do this again towards, like, later in the summer.
So what's during the summer, who's reaching out to people? Who are in need?
We will,
No, I'm sorry.
Because you're saying.
There are, we've got to get the list together, but the people we know about, yes, it will be me, Rabbi Fred will be back in July,
I see.
the office. It was better to make it systematic and take a little more time than to just jump in and not. Okay, well, thank you, Zoomies, any last words?
Very much, and Martha, do you want to turn off the recording?
Yes.
Make
oh, the
sure,
recording is
make
on.
sure you remember to do that.
I forgot while we were having this
Is
little,
exactly.
thank you all, bye.
Thank you all.